The Sony FE 35mm f1.8 lens was released in the summer of 2019, which means I'm now had it in my hands for the past 6 months. Here's my long-term review. By now, there are plenty of sources on the internet where you can get first impressions, MTF charts, test photos, comparisons, and every other surface level critique. As a long-term review, I want to cover the few things that need more time to develop a sense for. These include the lens's durability, its lasting utility, and my broader impressions on what I think about it after all things have been measured and inspected and compared and well considered. That said, here's a very quick brief on Sony's full-frame 35-1.8 lens. This lens measures in at 2 5/8 inches in diameter and is 2 7/8 inches long. It weighs 9.9 ounces. And inside there's 11 elements in 9 groups, with one of those being in a spherical element. The lens uses a linear autofocus motor with internal focusing, and there's 9 rounded aperture blades. On the outside, it has an autofocus manual focus switch, as well as a customizable focus hold button on the side of the barrel. First up, let's talk about its durability. And so far, this lens has made a number of air travel trips with me, including a couple times to New York, a couple trips to Oregon, and another trip to Wyoming. And I don't have one of those fancy photo gear roller bags, so I've always just thrown it on in with my carry-on luggage, wrapped in a lightly padded Tamrac Goblin lens pouch. And it's obviously not the highest level of protection as it makes its way through the airports and the overhead bins and ground transportation, but I'm happy to report that it's always come through unscathed. And the barrel is metal, and it's held up really great so far. There's only some faint paint scratches or blemishing near the front past the focus ring here. I've also used the lens in the snow and rain and at the base of misty waterfalls and in dusty environments with no noticeable compromises to the weather sealing. And after 6 months, the lens continues to not show any dust specks on the inside. There's no haze and no fungus either. On a related note, I really hate making any sort of physical contact with the front element of my lenses, and I'll avoid it at all costs if I can, and instead I'll make a more liberal use of a lens blower. But when it comes to shooting in the elements, there really isn't much choice for wiping away any precipitation buildup. And after these types of cleanings, I can also say that the lens doesn't show any signs of scratching on the front element either. In the case of clearing the lenses at the waterfalls, I have to admit I was just using my shirt and not something more glass friendly, so I've never really babied this lens too much. Keep in mind this is not a Sony G or a G Master series lens, but it's a promising sign that even though a lens without those more premium designations, it can hold its own in durability. Next, let's talk about its lasting utility. So in the beginning of this video, I mentioned lasting utility, and by that I mean looking at how much use I get out of it in the long run. I don't know about you, but it's happened to me a few times at least where I'd purchase a lens and was excited about using it for the first couple weeks or so, and then as time goes on I find myself reaching it for it less and less until I might as well sell it. After 6 months with the Sony 35-1.8, this is yet to happen, and I still enjoy using it across the board for many different things. Almost every YouTube video of mine, except I think one since I got this lens, has been shot with it. And well, I guess make this video number 2 since I'm holding this bad boy. Photography wise, I've used it for portraits and animals, but mostly landscapes, including panoramas. And what I like about 35mm as opposed to wider focal lengths for landscapes is that it can really work to simplify a composition. So the wider the angle of view, the more that's going to be in the frame that needs to be thought out, and making sure it belongs and balances and adds meaning rather than distracts. And 35mm would probably be considered tight as far as landscapes go, but personally I've always enjoyed that type of image. In the rundown of the specs, I mentioned how small and light it is, and I think that also weighs in my appreciation for it. Adding it to my backpack has basically the same footprint as not bringing it at all. It's really travel friendly, and on my second trip to Oregon this year, it's literally the only lens I brought with me. When I first get a lens, sure I might think of all those lab tests that tell me all about its optical properties, but most of that stuff starts losing meaning after a while of using it, and instead it's replaced by how it actually works for me out in the real world. So to summarize this lens, I'll go over my main thoughts when I go to use it today after 6 months of having it. So what I like is that it's lightweight and compact, and it can go with me pretty much anywhere. And it seems to have really good weather sealing, especially for not being a G or G Master type Sony lens, and it's earned my trust in that respect. It's got great image quality and sharpness, even mounted to the 61 megapixel A7R4. The autofocus is fast and keeps up with all the various AFC tracking modes in the Sony cameras, such as real-time eye autofocus and real-time tracking. And it's also very quiet and it's reliable when recording video. There's a couple downsides to mention though, and first that there's going to be some noticeable color fringing when you're shooting it wide open in the right lighting conditions. So for example, backlighting on specular highlights at f1.8 will definitely bring it out. Personally, I can excuse this away as the lens would probably be much larger and heavier and more expensive to make it optically pristine, but it's worth noting for you to make an informed decision. At $748, it is a little on the pricier side for a regular non-G Master Sony lens. For comparison, the Sony FE 85mm f1.8 lens costs $598, and the Sony FE 50mm f1.8 lens costs $248. However, like I mentioned, in some ways this lens does act more like a G series lens, even if it's not in the name. To wrap this up, my friend Ted Forbes over on his YouTube channel, The Art of Photography, named it his best lens of 2019, which I think is probably appropriate. He has access to way more gear than I do across brands, so I'm okay to trust his opinion. When considering everything this lens has going for it, weighed against the price and the little hiccup in the color fringing, it does stand out as being worth looking at. So if you want to check out more details about the Sony FE 35mm f1.8 or order one for yourself, please go ahead and use my links in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.